Hey guys, welcome and thanks for joining us. My name's Holly Hatch and I am the co-founder of Club Calisthenics in Denver, Colorado. And I'm here with a very special guest, one of our favorite calisthenics pros and teachers around, Simon. Simon, thanks for joining us today. We'll be asking some questions and having some fun and getting hopefully some of your questions answered at home. But first, Simon, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I'm a calisthenics coach. I've been doing some form of bodyweight training for about 20 years. So I've trained in gymnastics, breakdancing, calisthenics, a bit of circus and martial arts. Predominantly what I do now is just bodyweight training or calisthenics. So I coach that, and my background is also in physical therapy or physiotherapy.
Well, cool. We've been having a blast learning from Simon. So yeah, we've got a couple people asking some questions. We've got Crystal Hatch, the other co-founder of Club Calisthenics, as well as our program director, Gonzalo Martins. So hopefully you enjoy from home, around the world, wherever you are, and let's get into it.
Hi guys, my name is Gonzalo Martins, and I'm here with Simon today. Thank you so much to be with us.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure to have you here. I'll start with a couple of questions that I think they are more towards people that are going to attend Club Calisthenics, more for that audience. And the first I would like to ask is, how do you combine training with the urge of getting a skill? So I'm in a rush to get a skill, but how do you combine that with the training?
Yeah, so sometimes it's really tempting to just train as hard as you can and spend every minute training, especially after you've done a workshop or get some boost in motivation. You've got this big urge to get a skill, but often that's not the smartest approach to get there, and it can lead to burnout or injury or something that holds you back. So it's about taking a sensible approach, putting a strategy in place to work towards that skill and training for it sensibly.
Great. So along those lines, what will be your advice? Let's say a novice comes to the gym and he wants to start training these advanced positions like planche, front levers. What will be your advice for someone starting this journey?
Yeah, so advice for beginners is just to stay consistent, find things that you really enjoy doing and focus on those things, and just be patient. So quite often you want skills like planche or front lever, and they're not skills that happen overnight. You need to train really hard for a long time, up to years to get these skills. So if you can stay consistent and work towards them, that's your best bet to get them.
So plateauing is going to be a reality for
for everyone.
Right? Along that, like, what will be your advice, like when someone starts plateauing, what they should do?
I think if you just reflect on your training, so there's a lot of reasons that you could plateau. It could be things like nutrition, recovery, it could be the way that you program, it could be the exercises that you're doing. So I think the best thing to do is just to reflect, take a look at what you've been doing, see if there's anything that you could change. Is your nutrition adequate? Is your recovery adequate? Is your programming adequate? And if things look pretty good, that's when you might try to implement some changes and see if you can kickstart a little bit of progress again. So you might do something like up the intensity or up the frequency, up the volume of your training. Just to go back to a bit of advice for beginners. So one thing that I see a lot is beginners start calisthenics, get really motivated, really into it, and they want to chase all the skills at once. So I want to do a human flag, I want to do a planche, I want to do a one-arm handstand, I want to do handstand push-ups. And unfortunately, if you spread yourself too thin, your progress is just so slow in each area. That being said, a lot of these skills supplement and help each other. So for example, getting planche push-ups will increase your potential to do handstand push-ups and vice versa. They use very, very similar muscles. So rather than spreading yourself too thin and trying to do 30 different exercises over the course of a week, if you can just pick one or two skills in the pushing area, one or two skills in the pulling area, try and chase those, stay consistent with the same exercises. That way you'll really maximize your progress. The good thing about being a beginner is the learning curve is pretty quick for beginners. So with beginners, it almost doesn't really matter what you do. As long as you're practicing, you'll get better. As you become more advanced, that's when you need to be a lot more intelligent with your training and really program appropriately for your goals.
And so touching a little bit about nutrition and resting, Is that as important as training? What are your thoughts about it?
I think they're secondary to training. Obviously, if your nutrition is really poor, you won't get any training benefits, but most people eat reasonably well. Same thing with resting. Training is always a priority for me, but they are also very important. So yeah, I think it's very important to get adequate rest and nutrition. And I think a lot of people put a lot of emphasis on the 1%ers or the things that actually don't matter that much. They put a lot of emphasis on the minor things like what supplements can I take, and should I do a drop set or should I do supersets? Is this really going to give me the edge? When it's your bread and butter things like training and recovery with rest and nutrition that are really going to make most of the difference in your progress.
And along those lines, there is a lot of questions like, should I go up to failure? Should I just save some energy? Like, what are your tips there?
You could make an argument for both of those cases. So unfortunately, like most answers, it depends, but to not just leave you there, you can make really good gains leaving a little bit in the tank. So stopping a rep shy of failure or a rep or two shy of failure, that's generally how I train. That can lead to being able to perform better on subsequent sets and more overall volume in your training session and on subsequent sessions. That being said, training to failure maximizes effort per set. So if you really go to failure, you're putting in maximal effort, and that's a really good way to make progress. People have made progress going to failure forever. Another thing about stopping shy of failure is if you don't go to failure at least some of the time, you're probably pretty poor at judging how far away from failure you are, and you might not be accurate with it. There's some evidence to suggest that people tend to not actually train that hard unless they're pushed. So I think both are really effective. If you just want to make sure that you're putting in maximal effort every time, go to absolute failure. As you get more advanced and you know how you're training, that's when you can stop a little bit shy. At the end of the day, I think it comes down to preference. If you really like training to failure, go for it. If not.
Going back to training high intensity, do you think it increases the risk of injury, or what are your thoughts about that?
I think it potentially could. You're putting more force through your body, but I think if you're sensible with it, you gradually progress to the higher intensities. You should be pretty safe with it. Yeah.
What is the most common mistake that you see people doing when they train for calisthenics?
I think spreading yourself too thin would be the main thing. Trying to achieve everything at once, and then you just end up kind of plateauing in every area. Yeah, I think it's best to just, as I said earlier, just pick a couple of things to focus on for a period of time, work towards those. When progress stops or when your goals change, that's when you can work on something else. Yep.
So let's go 20 years back, like the little Simon. Yep. When you start working out or going on this journey, what will be the advice that you'll give to that little Simon in your training? What would have done differently in your training?
I probably would have stayed consistent with calisthenics and chased fewer disciplines. I think I would have got a lot further if I just stayed doing that, and that's what I really enjoy now. That being said, at the time I really enjoyed doing some other things like training some martial arts, doing a bit of circus. Yeah, that would be my advice.
What are your current goals? So you achieved the full planche, you have those handstand push-ups, all those advanced calisthenics skills. Like, what are you training right now? What are your goals?
So I really wanted to do 30 handstand push-ups for my 30th birthday, and I injured my shoulder and didn't achieve that. So I want to get 30 handstand push-ups this year. Then some other goals are things like just improving my general pulling strength. I obviously want to maintain the skills that I've got, but improving things like my front lever and one-arm pull-up, and doing a little bit of hand balancing as well.
All right. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much for your answers.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
And if you have any questions for us, let us know.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, my name is Crystal Hatch. I am the co-founder of ClubCal Calisthenics here in Denver, Colorado. And yeah, thank you so much for being here. We've had a blast with you training this week and just exploring the mountains and getting your training tips and just chatting. So thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. I had some questions just in terms of like the general day-to-day for you. So do you have like a specific morning routine that you like to do every morning?
I would say my only routine that I follow every day is to have a coffee. So just drink coffee in the morning. Otherwise, there's no specific morning routine that I follow. I wake up at different times each day, and it will change month to month.
Are you a morning person?
No.
No. Okay. So you're more like, you stay up late. You probably train a little bit towards like the midday.
Yeah, or evenings. Yeah.
Oh, evenings.
Sometimes it's midnight.
Oh,
yeah.
Man. Wonderful. I love it. Do you notice, like, if you've got more rest, that you feel fresher, that you can train at certain
Definitely.
periods?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, I think
cool.
rest is super important.
So on that line, I mean, if your first meal of the day, is that usually lunch or is it breakfast?
I think I would call it breakfast, being the first meal of the day, but I think you could argue that either way.
What's your general breakfast look like?
Usually I'd have oatmeal with fruit and honey, or bacon, eggs, and sweet potato. Those are the two things that I have most frequently, I'd say.
That sounds like delicious.
Yeah.
Great idea. Great way to do it. Do you have any tips or ideas in terms of like using food to fuel your workouts? Do you like to usually eat before you train or after?
I usually like to eat after I train. I find if I eat too much before I train, I have a really hard time training. That being said, training when you're hungry sucks as well. So I think just being satiated and eating afterwards is my preference.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So do you have any feelings one way or another on creatine or other amino acids for training gains?
Yeah, so I think creatine has really good evidence behind it. There's a lot of research in creatine. It's shown to be safe. It's shown to give pretty modest but significant changes in terms of strength and power and endurance output. That being said, I don't think there's a great deal of evidence that I'm aware of for many other things. Yeah.
Yeah. Would you suggest like women and men take it at the same?
I'm not too sure. Yeah.
No worries.
I think my intuition is I think so, but I'm not too. I don't know too much about it.
Okay, so I think myself as well as a lot of women would like to know. Is it possible for us to achieve like a straddle planche or a human flag? I'm really tall. I'm 5'10".
Yep. Yeah, definitely. It definitely is. I think people tend to think things are impossible until they see it, and then suddenly it's known to be possible, and anyone can kind of do it. It's no longer such an amazing thing, and I think you see a lot of progress since YouTube has come out, and things that people thought nobody could do 10 years ago are now just commonplace. And if you look at high-level pole dancers, you see a lot of women doing full human flag pretty well. There are a few women doing planche as well, so it's definitely something that's achievable. I think a lot of the time it is harder because on average women don't have the same upper body strength as men. That being said, it's definitely not impossible. It's something you can achieve.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And there's a lot of women out there who are stronger than men. So.
Great, that's great news. I mean, would you suggest, like, if my goal is straddle planche and handstand, would you suggest me kind of breaking that training up? I know Gonzalo kind of touched a little bit on that, trying to chase too many skills.
Yeah.
Would you suggest kind of like breaking those two things up just for a moment?
Yeah. So handstand kind of falls into a different category as planche. Planche is very much a strength dominant move, whereas a handstand, when it's done well, doesn't have a very big strength component. It's quite modest. You can hold a handstand for minutes at a time. You can't do that with a planche. So handstand relies a lot more on coordination and balance and fine motor control. Planche is more of a brute strength thing with less of a skill component. It's much easier to balance a planche with a lower center of mass than it is a handstand. The way I would program for that is to train your handstand training before your planche. So if you want to do it in the same session, you might do handstand as early in the session or as part of your warm-up and then do planche later, or do them in separate sessions. I certainly wouldn't do handstand in a fatigued state because you'll be training bad motor patterns, and you won't really be optimizing your progress that way.
Yeah, it wouldn't look as cool to other people either, which is kind of like
and
fun.
And it's just miserable. If you've ever if you ever trained handstand then planche, you can do both pretty well.
Yeah.
If you ever train planche and then handstand right after, you just can't handstand.
And it's just very discouraging.
Yeah, it's super discouraging.
For sure. Okay,
Yeah.
good advice. Okay, so I know there's a lot of ideas going around in the fitness community on different techniques and things like that. We do some lifting and some lower body strength here. What are your ideas on bracing? And what's your feeling about that, like bracing using breath?
So bracing using breath is in taking a breath in and increasing your intra-abdominal pressure when you do a lift, I think it's absolutely fine. So the theory behind that is when you take a breath in and increase, or when you brace, you increase your intra-abdominal pressure, your organs will hug your spine a little bit more, create a little bit more stability, and that's kind of like your internal way of wearing a back brace. So that might be something that you do before you do a heavy squat or a deadlift. And I think that's absolutely fine. It'll put your back in a much more stable position, much more stable place to do those lifts.
Thank you for that. And then also along those same lines, when you're doing squats and things like that, would you suggest moving your knees past your toes? Is that okay?
Yeah, it's absolutely fine. Yeah, I wouldn't suggest it in that I wouldn't recommend that everybody moves their knees past their toes. There's many different ways that you can squat. But if somebody's knees go beyond their toes, that's absolutely fine. I don't think there's a reason to give a blanket rule as you shouldn't do that. Yeah. If you look at really high level weightlifters, if you look at Olympic lifters, you'll very often see their knees moving in front of their toes.
And they have a ton of weight too.
And they have a ton of weight, and they're the best at doing those things. So
absolutely,
yeah, it's absolutely fine.
Cool. Well, when are you coming back to Denver, Colorado to see us again?
When you invite me.
Well, hopefully soon. I think everybody here absolutely loves having you. It's like your second home.
Being here.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.